job descriptions maybe. A great way to communicate what your employee's responsibilities are in any given job, right? Okay, so then how do we put together these job descriptions? There's a couple of websites that I'm going to give you if you just want to jot them down. They're really helpful in order if you're going through just updating your job descriptions, you probably have them, they probably exist. But it might be helpful for you to go back and just check on them occasionally to make sure things haven't changed. But one is careeronestop.org. And by the way, these are free government-sponsored websites that will help you with job descriptions amongst other things. And these are the websites that we utilize actually in the full seminar. So careeronestop.org, and there's also ONET Online, O-N-E-T. And utilizing these two websites will help you or give you a great resource in helping kind of packaging and putting together job descriptions that you can utilize, whether you're auditing existing ones or putting together new ones. ONET Online? I think it's, I'm not sure, can you check on your phone, John, for me? ONET Online, and the way that I get to it, if you go to careeronestop.org, there's a drop-down box in the top right-hand corner, and you can actually go to it from there. That's how I get to it in the seminar, and we go back and forth between the two websites. But John will check and let us know that before we break for the afternoon. So job descriptions. So once we have effective job descriptions, we can then begin to build and utilize that job description to build everything else from a compliance standpoint in regards to evaluating employee performance, interviewing employees and whatnot, directly from that job description. So if we have effective job descriptions, clear job descriptions, we can then utilize those for interview questions. Have you guys ever been in an interview where you have a supervisor or a manager, and you guys are probably really talented at interviewing employees, being in human resources, but have you ever had a supervisor start asking questions that they absolutely shouldn't be asking?
Yes.
Yes. That whole deer in the headlights, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just opened their mouth and said that. My wife, it was kind of funny. She was pregnant at the time, and I joked with her, and I'm like, you should go out and start applying for jobs all across town just to see, what kind of response that you get. Obviously I was joking. She doesn't work, but at any rate.
She's going to kill you for saying that. She works your tail off.
She works. She's a mom. Far more difficult job than what I do, for sure. And those that are moms in the room know exactly what I'm talking about. So once we have the job descriptions, you can utilize those to populate and build interview questions. And obviously, if you're prepared in an interview and you have pre-identified or pre-prepared questions that you're going to ask, not only does it help you ask appropriate questions pertaining to their ability to do a job or not, but it also will help kind of guide the conversation and prevent you from asking questions that you probably shouldn't be asking as well. Like, where do you go to church? Or how many kids do you have? Are you married? When did you graduate from college? All of those types of things that could be utilized to extract information that could potentially be protected. And then obviously, as we're talking about employee performance, we can utilize those job descriptions to build our performance evaluations based on the objectives that were outlined in the job description, right? So we've identified the essential functions of the job and the very tasks that you have to be able to perform and accomplish on a regular basis. You can then evaluate someone's performance very objectively, right? Based on those specific tasks that were outlined in the job description, right? And then we've got this issue of, well, how do you provide a level of consistency from one supervisor to another? A lot of you probably have some sort of numbering system or some way to put on paper this employee is or is not meeting the objectives that we've set out for them to meet. And you're going to be evaluating these different objectives probably independently of the others. So I was talking to John actually early this morning about this, and the question is, what if Jason is my supervisor? And Jason happens to be a great guy for those of you who know him. I've had the pleasure of hanging out with him on a couple of occasions. And we've had several conversations. And let's just say that Jason is a very easygoing guy, great to work with, and he's the kind of guy that just gives rave reviews to everybody. everybody. You know, you check a survey at a restaurant about the service and you give them all 9s or 10s. Or in an employee performance evaluation, you give them all 9s and 10s or 4s and 5s in a 5-point system. So he's a very generous guy, but what if Gail comes along and she's a little bit more hard-nosed than Jason was? She's my new supervisor. Jason got promoted and now Gail's my new supervisor. Well, what if she then starts giving me 3s on my performance evaluation? If you go back and look at the documentation, it's going to appear that my performance has decreased than what it previously was when Jason was my supervisor. Right? So how do we create a system or implement a system that provides some control or consistency for manager to manager? So then this is my thought. It's if average is right in the middle of the equation, if it's we'll just use a 5-point system for example. If average is the goal, meeting expectations, wouldn't it be appropriate to give that employee a 3? Right? And if they're not meeting expectations, then it would be appropriate to give that particular employee maybe a 1 or a 2. Or if they're outperforming or overachieving the expectations that you set out for them, then maybe it's a 4 or a 5. And the question that I proposed to John was, is it possible for someone to consistently overachieve? Is it really possible in that numbering system? Don't your expectations at some point change for a particular employee? I mean, would that be reasonable to assume?
Maybe they're comparing you to the other workers instead.
Right. And right, maybe it's comparing, that's a great point. Maybe it's comparing you to other workers as opposed to the task themselves. Right? Okay, so sometimes it might require some adjustment because of someone's maybe their excellence or how they are consistently overperforming.
This depends on the standard.
Sure.
I mean, if your standard is 500 pieces a day, and that's normal, that's a 3.
Right.
And the person's constantly doing 700, they're always overachieving.
Correct.
So then you have to either adjust their standard, promote them, or whatever.
Right.
But if you keep them at that same position,
Then they're constantly wanting to overachieve.
Exactly.
Right. So, and once again, and part of the book is, if someone can produce 500 pieces or widgets in 35 hours a week, and that's the standard, at that point, do you allow them to take 5 hours and not really do a whole lot, or do you maybe put more work on their shoulders or increase the standard? You know, how as an employer would you handle that situation, if you don't mind me asking? Don't mean to put you on the
no,
spot.
if they can complete 500 pieces, just make sure I understand, 500 pieces in 35 hours a week, what do I do with the remaining 5 hours?
Correct. If that's the goal, if the idea is in 40 hours you're supposed to complete 500.
Depends on what your production level and demands are.
Right.
You know, if I don't need them, I'm not going to produce them, so I have excess inventory.
Right.
So then those 5 hours, do I retrain them? Do I have them, you know, working with somebody else to get them up to that?
Maybe catch up, training or whatnot.
Exactly. So I mean, you use it. You have to be somewhat creative for that
Right.
individual. Find out what else they can do. Maybe they need to be cross-trained.
Right.
So there's a lot of options.
Sure. And that's the point, and that was why I asked the question, and I'm glad that you answered it that way, is because sometimes you have to get creative in utilizing human capital or your human resources in order to continue to educate or stretch or train them so that there's not dead time. Because generally speaking, when they have downtime or dead time, they generally try to beat the system and figure out, or not, and I'm not saying this for everybody, but there's a natural tendency for them to try to be lazy or whatnot. But if you're
They'll make the work fit into the
put
hours.
into the hours, correct. They realize at what pace they have to work in order to accomplish the objective. So, and I've seen employees that are just wired that way, and like you mentioned, they're probably not in that position long because they're getting promoted. Now there's other employees that are just like, why would I make 700 widgets when I only have to make 500? They're not paying me anymore to make the extra 200, so I'm just going to hang out, take an extra smoke break, or whatever, and make my 500 widgets in my 40 hours a week. That makes sense? I've also had some other employers that send those employees home, which is terrible for morale. You know, so they're obviously working by the hour, and you're essentially penalizing them to some degree, for being really good at what they do. Just a thought. Just a thought. So, do we have any attorneys in the room? Any attorneys? Okay. You're safe. I'm safe? No. I was gonna I promise. I was gonna ask them for some feedback, but you guys, and before we move on to some of the materials and handouts that you have to wrap up our time together this afternoon, you guys obviously, you've seen the commercials, the advertisements from the attorneys and the lawyers and whatnot. So once again, I'm not going to go into a scenario. I thought that we might have an attorney here that participates sometime, and I was going to ask them a couple of questions just kind of off the cuff. But the idea is if you do these and if you have effective job descriptions and you build your performance evaluations from your job descriptions and you have a very specific and objective way to evaluate your employee's performance, the documentation that comes along with that is going to protect you from any of these issues, these wrongful termination suits, or, that's not fair because you did that, or you didn't promote me because, I'm from a different country, or you didn't promote me because I'm pregnant, or whatever the situation might be. The other idea about performance evaluations that I just want to briefly mention is a lot of employers that I've talked with have, they almost have this mindset, and even employees to some degree too, because part of what I have the privilege of doing is sitting down with employers, their actual employees, and trying to get a pulse or feel for what really is going on in a particular organization. Because oftentimes employees willing to maybe share with me, some outsider that they don't know, don't work with, don't know from Adam, what it's really like to work at a particular organization. And there's this idea or this concept that performance evaluations are punitive in nature. They're going to get beaten up, or they're going to get slapped on the hand, or they're going to get penalized during these performance evaluations. And I would just encourage you guys, and I know that I'm probably going to assume that all of you guys are this way. If you look at discipline, the root word, or the word discipline comes from the same word that disciple comes from. And if we use that as a model to coach, to teach, to train, to mentor, if there are performance issues, and there are going to be, there's a learning curve with a new employee in any environment. But during this learning curve or during the course of employment, if there are areas of concern or issue, work with them, coach them. Identify objectives or key ways that you're going to encourage them or help them or assist them improve their performance in the various areas that they need addressing. So don't punish them necessarily for it and then not offer a solution. So you utilize performance evaluations to not only protect yourself, but also improve productivity. We talked about the 3 hours a day of real, true productive hours in an 8-hour workday. If employees are more productive, then that's a good thing for everybody, right? There's more money to go around. It lowers costs. Maybe they don't have to hire, other employees to accomplish some of the same things. So in front of you guys, I'm assuming, did everybody get a copy of some of this stuff? How are we on time, by the way? You're good? If you look at this one just at the very beginning, Guidelines for Performance Appraisal Checklist. This is just a good a handout. There's some information on the back too that we're going to briefly go through. That's a great takeaway. It's a great point of reference in the future, so on and so forth. So the first one, appraise individual employee performance regularly, systematically, and in accordance with company policy. So just out of curiosity, how many of you guys do it every quarter? Once a year? Most everybody? Once a year. A great book, another great book is called Leadership in the 1-Minute Manager. Have you guys ever read this book?
Yes.
We've had situations where, or the idea behind this book is clearly identifying what's expected of an employee. And then constantly, consistently, 1-minute praisings or 1-minute reprimands. Okay, so you're constantly communicating and updating to an employee whether they're doing a fantastic job or whether they need work on something.